She typed a desperate message to Keanu Reeves at midnight. Her son was dying, the bills were piling up, and no one was listening. She never expected a reply. But what Keanu did next didn't just save a life. It started a movement no one saw coming. What made this quiet man answer her call for help? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Danielle Brooks knew how to survive on 4 hours of sleep, 3 cups of coffee, and 2 slices of stale toast. She knew how to smile when she was breaking, how to laugh when she felt like crying, and how to show up day after day, no matter how badly her feet ached or how many shifts she had to juggle. But that night, sitting in her dark kitchen, surrounded by unopened bills and the silence that pressed in like a weight on her chest, Danielle felt something unfamiliar. She felt the edge of giving up. The microwave clock blinked 12:41 a.m. She had just finished her second shift at the diner, her uniform still smelling like grease and floor cleaner. The only light in the house came from the range hood above the stove, casting a pale glow over the counter where envelopes were stacked like a silent threat. Medical bills, rent past due, the final notice from the electric company, a lab invoice she didn't remember authorizing. And then there was the big one, the one she kept tucked under everything else, the one with her son's name at the top. Miles Brooks, age 6, diagnosis, mitochondrial myopathy. The most recent specialist visit hadn't gone well. Miles had fainted in the hallway of the clinic. The nurse had rushed him into an exam room, and the doctor's expression had turned grave. The new medication might help, but it came with a price tag that made Danielle physically sick. Her phone vibrated beside her. A low battery warning blinked at 10%. She ignored it. From down the hall, a small voice echoed, muffled. Danielle was on her feet instantly. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She patted down the narrow hallway to the bedroom on the left, the door painted with crooked stars and superheroes. Miles was curled up in his bed, tiny against the oversized comforter. His favorite plush dinosaur clutched to his chest. "My legs hurt," he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "I know, baby," Danielle whispered, brushing damp curls from his forehead. He felt hot, too hot. She grabbed the thermometer from the nightstand, clicked it on, and pressed it gently against his temple. The beep felt like thunder in the quiet room. 100.6. Not hospital level, but close. Closer than she could afford. "I'll get you some water," she said softly. Back in the kitchen, she filled a glass from the tap. Her hands trembled. The water rippled. She didn't cry. Not yet, there wasn't time. Instead, she set the glass down, opened her phone, and scrolled through her feed. Anything to distract her. A news story caught her eye. Keanu Reeves had quietly donated funds to rebuild a burn unit at a children's hospital. No red carpet, no cameras. Just a short quote, "I just wanted to help." Danielle stared at the screen for a long moment. And then, almost without thinking, she tapped his profile. A blank tweet window opened. The cursor blinked at her, waiting. Her fingers hovered. Then, she began to type. "At Keanu Reeves, official. I don't know if you'll ever see this. I don't know if anyone will. I'm a single mom of 3. My youngest, Miles, has a rare mitochondrial disease. He's 6. He wants to be an astronaut, but right now, I can't even afford his medication. We're drowning. I'm not asking for a handout. I just need help." Danielle stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the post button. Her chest rose and fell in shallow waves. She could delete it. Go to bed. Wake up in the morning and pretend she hadn't considered begging a stranger, an actor, a celebrity, for something so personal. But there was a weight behind those words that felt too big to carry anymore. And that picture? She tapped the photo icon and scrolled past selfies, grocery lists, and blurry snaps of the kids at the park. She found Miles, at his last hospital visit, hooked up to monitors, smiling anyway, giving the camera a thumbs up with his IV arm. Brave, even now. She attached it. Her thumb moved on instinct. The button clicked. Hosting. The moment it left her phone, a strange stillness settled over the room, like the air had shifted. "Mama?" Nina's voice startled her. She turned to see her daughter standing in the hallway, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, eyes bleary but sharp. "Is Miles okay?" Danielle nodded, though her voice cracked. "He's sleeping now. Legs are hurting again." "I heard you get up," Nina said, stepping closer. "And the TV's still on in your room." Danielle opened her arms and Nina folded into them without a word. She was 13, too old to be this small, too young to carry this much. "I saw the tweet," Nina mumbled. Danielle's heart stopped. "What?" "It popped up when I opened my phone. I follow Keanu too." Of course she did. Nina loved movies, especially the ones where the quiet guy saved the day. "I was just..." Danielle paused. "I don't know. I didn't think anyone would actually see it." Nina pulled back and looked up at her. "I'm glad you sent it." Danielle blinked fast. "Really?" "Yeah, because maybe someone finally will." They stood there for a moment, in the soft buzz of the refrigerator and the glow of the microwave clock. Then Nina said, "You should sleep, Mama." "I will, soon." Danielle kissed her daughter's forehead, watched her walk back to bed, and returned to the kitchen. The tweet sat on her screen like a question she couldn't answer. Notifications trickled in. One like, two, a heart from someone she didn't know. She locked her phone. It was done. Outside, the wind rustled against the window pane. Inside, a mother stood alone in the quiet hum of a house held together by love, grit, and the thinnest thread of hope. She had no idea what she'd just started. Danielle finally collapsed onto the couch, still in her work uniform. Her phone buzzed a few more times, but she didn't look. She couldn't. She just needed a moment to breathe. The kind of breath that didn't carry the weight of co-pays or missed calls from creditors. A breath that reminded her she was still here. Her neck ached, her feet throbbed, but what hurt most couldn't be fixed with ice or painkillers. It was the ache of powerlessness. She had always been strong, the one who handled everything. But tonight, something broke. Just enough to let that tweet slip through. And now it was out there, floating among millions of others, lost in a tide of digital noise. She closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to do nothing. Not fold laundry, not calculate payment plans, not search for a second-hand wheelchair that would actually fit Miles. Just nothing. Sleep didn't come easy, but it came, shallow and restless. And while she slept, the tweet traveled. Shared by a nurse in Portland. Retweeted by a teacher in Detroit. Seen by someone in Los Angeles, who passed it to someone else. Someone who read it in silence and decided to do something. Because not every hero answers with a spotlight. Some answer in the quiet. Danielle hadn't always been this tired. There was a time, not that long ago, when she had dreams like everyone else. She wanted to be a teacher. She had a college acceptance letter tucked away in a drawer and a scrapbook full of plans. She'd fallen in love at 20 with a man named Terrence, who made her laugh until her ribs hurt and told her she could do anything. They got married fast, moved into a small 2-bedroom house in East Point, and had Nina just a year later. Things were hard, but there was joy. It felt like building something from scratch with your bare hands. Hard work, but worth it. Then came Miles. At first, the signs were small. He stumbled a lot as a toddler, more than he should have. He was slow to walk, slow to speak. His pediatrician said it might just be developmental delays. Some kids take longer, they'd said. But Danielle knew. Deep in her bones, she knew something was wrong. After the third ER visit in 2 months, a specialist ordered genetic testing. The results came on a gray Tuesday, the kind of day where the sky matched the pavement and nothing felt real. Terrence stood with her in the small exam room when Dr. Lin gave the news. Mitochondrial myopathy, the doctor said gently. It's rare, progressive. It affects the muscles, coordination, and energy levels. Danielle had nodded, numb, but Terrence, he backed away like someone had dropped a bomb on the floor. That night he packed a bag. He didn't scream, he didn't fight. He just looked at her with hollow eyes and said, "I can't do this." "You mean you won't?" Danielle replied. He left before Miles even woke up the next morning. Danielle never cried in front of the kids. She cried in the shower, in the car, in the storage closet at work, but not in front of them. She promised herself she'd be the one constant in their lives no matter what. Even when her hands shook signing the medical forms, even when the bills kept arriving faster than she could open them. She sold her wedding ring first, then the living room TV, then the car, replaced by an old Honda that coughed every morning before starting. College became a faded dream. The teacher she'd once hoped to become had been replaced by a woman who could recite prescription copays better than poetry and measure seizure triggers more precisely than anyone should ever have to. But she kept going, because what else could she do? Nina grew up fast. At 13, she could braid her own hair, get Miles ready for school, and reheat leftovers without a reminder. She knew the names of Miles's medications and how to dial 911 without panicking. She also knew that when her mom's voice got quiet instead of loud, it meant the stress was getting dangerous. She'd seen Danielle grip the sink edge more than once, fighting off a wave of dizziness from skipping meals. Darnell, her middle child, was quieter, more sensitive. He carried guilt in the way kids often do when they don't understand what's happening. He offered his birthday money once to help pay for Miles's prescriptions. Danielle had smiled and hugged him so tightly he squirmed, but inside, it broke her heart. Then there was her mother, Gloria, once sharp, proud, and independent, but now? The early signs of dementia were no longer early. Some days she remembered where she put the keys. Some days she asked why Miles was so small for his age, forgetting they'd already had that conversation a dozen times. Danielle moved Gloria into their home after a fall at her apartment left her with a sprained wrist. It was supposed to be temporary. That was 8 months ago. Now Gloria wandered into the kitchen at odd hours, looking for people who weren't there, talking to photos that had long since faded. Danielle didn't blame her. The disease was cruel. It erased people piece by piece. But caring for her mother on top of everything else sometimes felt like balancing the world on a string of dental floss. And still, she showed up, day after day, at the hospital for her morning shift, at the diner for the evening one. Between those hours, she was a nurse, a cook, a counselor, and a scheduler. She used lunch breaks to argue with insurance agents and nights to fill pillboxes with trembling hands. Sometimes it felt like the only time she breathed was in the quiet hours after the dishes were done, the lights were off, and the house had finally gone still. That was the moment she'd posted the tweet. And somehow, while she slept on the threadbare couch with a dish towel for a blanket, the world had seen it. When she woke the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing uncontrollably, she thought it was a glitch. Over 500 notifications, then 1,000. Then 5,000. Her tweet had gone viral. She sat up, heart racing. Her inbox was flooded. Messages from strangers, comments, retweets, people offering prayers, others asking where they could donate. A few skeptics, of course, but overwhelmingly it was kindness. Someone had even started a GoFundMe without asking her. It already had over $2,000 in donations. Danielle didn't know what to feel. By the time Nina came into the kitchen, her mother was still sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like it was a bomb about to explode. "What's going on?" Nina asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Danielle showed her. Nina gasped. "Mama, this is everywhere." Darnell, clutching his blanket, peeked in. "Am I famous now?" Danielle gave a shaky laugh. "I think maybe we all are." An hour later, there was a knock at the door. It was a local news crew. Then another, and another. Reporters called, producers emailed, social media influencers reached out. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Everyone wanted an interview. But Danielle wasn't ready. It wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about attention. It was about Miles. And Miles was still asleep in his bed, completely unaware that the world outside was now watching. Danielle closed her front door, leaned against it, and exhaled. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. In a quiet Los Angeles home, tucked behind high hedges and shaded by old oaks, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his study, a steaming mug of tea cooling between his hands. The fireplace crackled low, the only sound in the room aside from the soft rustle of the wind brushing against the tall windows. He'd finished a long day on set, turned down a late-night event, and finally settled into his favorite chair, the one no one ever photographed. This was where he came to be no one, no actor, no icon, just a man who'd seen too much loss, who preferred solitude over applause. He had a habit of reading at night, not just books, but news articles, blog posts, the endless stream of human stories on the internet. He said it kept him grounded, reminded him what mattered. So when the headline flashed across his feed, "Single Mom's Plea to Keanu Reeves Goes Viral Overnight," his finger hovered, then clicked. At first he scanned, then he read every word. The tweet was short, honest. The picture of the boy, Miles, smiling weakly with an IV in his arm, hit something deep in Keanu's chest. Not pity, not guilt, just something personal, familiar. A kind of ache that reminded him of the hospital rooms he'd spent time in long before the world knew his name. He didn't reply. He didn't retweet. He didn't share. Instead, he stared at the screen in silence. Then he opened a contact folder on his phone marked simply Foundation. He scrolled to a name, Nadine Huerta. She was his most trusted assistant, the only one who handled his private outreach, the projects no one ever knew about, the burn units, the pediatric cancer centers, the trauma support grants for grieving families, the things he funded anonymously. He typed a short message. "Can you look into this for me? Quietly, no press." Attached was the tweet. Within seconds, the message was sent. Keanu set his phone down and leaned back in the chair. His gaze drifted toward the shelf lined with old books and a few framed photos. Most were of people long gone, a sister, a friend, a mentor. Loss had taught him many things, but one truth always remained. The people who asked for the least often needed the most. And when he saw someone like Danielle Brooks, he didn't see a headline. He saw someone who reminded him of himself. Nadine Huerta was used to late-night texts from Keanu. She'd worked with him for over a decade, not just as an assistant, but as a confidant in the causes closest to his heart. Most of the world only knew the public version of his generosity, stories about giving up his seat on the subway, buying lunch for the crew, or donating portions of his salary. But Nadine knew the full scope. Millions spent quietly on causes that never made headlines. So when his message came through with a screenshot of Danielle's tweet and that simple directive, quietly, no press, she was already sliding out of bed. By 6 a.m., she'd compiled a full dossier. Danielle Brooks, age 35, Atlanta, Georgia, single mother of 3, primary income, hospital aide, secondary income, diner waitress. Son, Miles Brooks, diagnosed with mitochondrial myopathy. Rare, progressive, limited treatment options. She'd even found security footage of Danielle walking Miles into the emergency room late at night, holding his backpack, her face etched with exhaustion. Nadine took a breath, then she placed a call. The line rang once. "Dr. Ben-Ari?" she said when the voice answered. "It's Nadine. I need a consult." Dr. Tamar Ben-Ari ran a medical support arm of the foundation, one designed for rapid mobilization. She didn't ask questions, just listened. Atlanta, 6-year-old boy, rare condition. His mother went public, but we're staying private. I'll put together options. What's the deadline? Today, Nadine said. Keanu wants movement before this becomes a media storm. By 9 a.m., Nadine had drafted a plan. They would initiate contact through a trusted intermediary, someone with local connections but no media affiliation. A simple phone call, a private offer for a medical evaluation, expenses covered. No cameras, no signatures, no expectation. Just help? Nadine forwarded the summary to Keanu. His response came back a minute later. Perfect, thank you. Then, as always, he signed off with nothing more than, okay. Back in his study, Keanu read through the file again. He saw the family photo, Danielle smiling faintly while holding a squirming Miles in her lap, Nina's arm draped protectively around her little brother, Darnell leaning in with a peace sign. And he made a quiet promise to himself. They would not go through this alone. He stood, slipped on a hoodie, and stepped out into the early morning light. The sun had barely crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass. Somewhere, a mother was waking up to chaos. And somewhere else, help was already on the way. By the time the morning news had picked up Danielle's tweet and social media lit up with hashtags and reaction videos, Nadine was already on her second call. She connected with a pediatric neurologist at Emory Hospital, someone from their confidential medical support list who had worked with the foundation before. A time was arranged, a discreet evaluation, no insurance required, no billing, no paperwork trail that could trigger public records. And then came the final piece, outreach. A woman named Helena Mitchell, a retired nurse and family liaison in Atlanta, was selected to make contact. She had gray curls, a grandmother's voice, and a gift for making even the most exhausted mothers feel safe. At 10:34 a.m., Danielle's phone rang. She stared at the unknown number. Something in her gut said to answer. "Hello? Ms. Brooks?" the woman asked gently. "My name is Helena. I'm calling on behalf of someone who read your story. He prefers to remain anonymous, but he'd like to offer help, medical care. No publicity, no cameras, just real support." Danielle's breath caught in her throat. "This isn't a scam?" she whispered. "No, ma'am," Helena said warmly. "You've been seen, and someone wants to help," quietly. Tears filled Danielle's eyes. "Why?" she asked. Helena smiled, unseen on the other end. "Because he's the kind of man who listens when others don't." As the call ended, Danielle stared at her children playing in the living room. Miles curled up with a blanket, Nina helping Darnell with his reading. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe help had finally arrived. Danielle was still trying to process the conversation with Helena when her phone rang again. The screen flashed another unknown number, this one with a Los Angeles area code. She hesitated. Her first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. There had already been too many reporters, influencers, and strangers asking for interviews. But something told her this one was different. She answered with caution. "Hello? Miss Brooks?" The voice was soft, professional. "My name is Claire Takeda. I work with a private outreach foundation, and I was asked to speak with you directly." Danielle gripped the kitchen counter. "Is this about the tweet?" "Yes," Claire said. "I understand the past few days have been overwhelming. I'd like to invite you to meet with me in person at a nonprofit office here in Atlanta. It's quiet, private, just the two of us." Danielle narrowed her eyes. "Why?" Claire paused. "Because someone read your message. Someone who wants to help, but not in the way most people are offering. There's no publicity, no cameras, just a conversation. You are free to say no. But if you're willing to hear more, I'll be there today, whatever time works for you." Danielle glanced into the living room. Miles was watching cartoons, his legs curled under him. Nina sat beside him, holding a coloring book for Darnell. Everything in their world was held together by tape and prayers. She couldn't afford to walk into a scam, but she couldn't afford not to either. "What's the address?" Danielle asked. Later that afternoon, Danielle sat in the passenger seat of Helena Mitchell's dusty old sedan, hands fidgeting in her lap. Helena had offered to drive. Parking down there's a nightmare, she'd said with a wink. Danielle hadn't argued. They pulled into a quiet brick building tucked between a dentist's office and a daycare. No signs, no cameras. Just a single gray door marked Suite 17. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and warm paper. The lights were soft. The waiting room held only 2 chairs and a stack of health magazines from last year. A small plaque on the wall read, "Healing is not about medicine alone. It's about being seen. KR Foundation." Danielle's heart skipped. Helena offered a reassuring nod, then opened the door to the inner room. Claire stood as they entered. She was in her 40s, neatly dressed in a navy blouse and slacks, with eyes that held the same calm weight as a seasoned nurse. She offered a hand. "Danielle, it's an honor to meet you." Danielle shook it cautiously. "You said you work with someone?" Claire gestured to the chairs and waited until they were seated. "I do. But before I say his name, I want to make something very clear. This meeting is not about publicity. It's not about press or performance. It's about help and hope." Danielle nodded slowly. Claire reached into her folder and pulled out a single photo. It was a candid shot, Keanu Reeves in a hospital room, bent low to speak with a young patient. No press in sight, just a man listening. Danielle blinked fast. "Is this?" "Yes," Claire said. "He read your tweet, and he sent us." Danielle stared at the photo, her throat tightening. The man in the picture wasn't performing for a camera. He wasn't wearing designer clothes or surrounded by handlers. He was just there, kneeling beside a child's hospital bed, his hand resting lightly on the rail, his eyes locked with the little boy's. She looked up. "Keanu Reeves?" Claire nodded. "He read your message the same night you sent it. He didn't respond publicly because that's not how he works, but it moved him, deeply." Danielle shook her head, stunned. I don't know. I just needed to scream into the void. I didn't think anyone would actually hear me." "Heard you," Claire said softly. "And he wants to help. If you're willing." Danielle's guard went back up. "Help how?" Claire leaned forward, setting the folder down gently. "Our foundation works directly with families facing rare and complex medical conditions. We've worked with hospitals across the country, funding research, covering treatment costs, arranging transport, housing, even respite care for caretakers." Danielle's hands trembled slightly. "Is this like a trial program? Some kind of condition?" "No strings," Claire assured her. "We cover the cost of Miles's evaluations, potential treatments, second opinions, whatever he needs. We have specialists already reviewing the information we could gather from public records. We'll arrange a full diagnostic workup next week, in partnership with Emory's pediatric neurology team." Danielle's heart pounded. "And the money?" "Handled," Claire said, quietly, anonymously. "Keanu has already set aside a private fund for families like yours. Yours would be the first to receive direct support from the new branch." Tears filled Danielle's eyes. "Why us?" "Because you asked," Claire said. "You did what most people are too afraid to do. You spoke the truth, not with anger, with love." Danielle looked down, trying to steady her breath. Claire placed a tissue box within reach and waited. No pressure, no rush. Finally, Danielle asked, "What do you need from me?" "Only this," Claire replied, "to say yes, and to trust that there are still people in the world who mean it when they say they care." The silence between them felt thick and sacred. Danielle finally nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please." Claire smiled, her expression warm and genuine. "We'll take it from here." Outside, the clouds had parted. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft golden beams across the office walls. For the first time in what felt like forever, Danielle exhaled without fear. The following week moved like a dream, too fast to grasp, too real to doubt. Danielle found herself walking through the pristine halls of Emory's pediatric research wing, holding Miles's hand while Darnell and Nina waited with a hospital volunteer in the children's library. Her nerves danced just under her skin, And even though every part of her screamed to brace for disappointment, she kept moving forward. Miles was quiet, his small fingers clutching hers tightly. He wore his favorite hoodie, the one with faded stars across the front, and his sneakers were scuffed from dragging his feet, but he was here, awake, curious, even smiling at the big stuffed giraffe in the waiting room. A nurse led them down a hallway lined with soft pastel paintings and gentle lighting. Everything about this place was designed to soothe. And then they met her. Dr. Sophia Reyes stepped into the room, wearing forest green scrubs and a calm, measured smile. Her dark hair was braided down her back, and her eyes were kind, but sharp. The kind of sharp Danielle recognized from long hours in hospitals. A woman who'd seen pain and decided to fight it. "Ms. Brooks," she said, extending a hand, "and this must be Miles." Miles offered a small wave. "Hi." Danielle's throat tightened. "Hi," she managed. Reyes crouched to Miles's eye level. "We're so happy you're here. I've read your file, and I think we're going to learn a lot together." She didn't say fix you. She didn't say cure. She said learn. That alone made Danielle trust her. The next hour blurred into tests, simple ones, reflex checks, range of motion, a few pricks for blood work. But Dr. Reyes narrated everything in a way Miles could understand, even letting him help by pressing the thermometer buttons. Afterward, they returned to the consultation room. Claire was already there, a folder in her lap and a gentle nod as they entered. Dr. Reyes took a seat beside her and folded her hands. "Miles' condition is complex," she began, "but he's a perfect candidate for a new pilot program we've developed specifically for mitochondrial disorders." Danielle's breath hitched. "What kind of program?" "A combined care model," Dr. Reyes explained. "Not just medication. Physical therapy, nutrition planning, targeted supplements, and a new clinical compound we've developed over the past 2 years. It's not experimental in the scary sense. We've completed early safety trials, but it is still in its infancy." Danielle reached instinctively for Miles's hand. "And you think it could help?" Dr. Reyes gave a slow, confident nod. "I believe it can give him a better quality of life. And time." Danielle blinked back sudden tears. She hadn't heard a doctor say something so direct, so hopeful, in years. Danielle pressed a hand to her chest, grounding herself. "What about the cost?" Dr. Reyes glanced to Claire, who answered gently. "Covered, every part of it. Travel, lodging if needed, specialists, all of it." Danielle stared, unsure how to even respond. I don't know how to thank you. I mean, this is..." Claire leaned in. "Danielle, this isn't charity. It's investment. Not just in Miles, but in what this program represents." Dr. Reyes nodded. "Your son's story is powerful, but he's not alone. There are hundreds of families out there, single parents, working-class homes, people who can't afford access to this kind of care. We're building something long-term, a system that doesn't forget those families." "And Keanu's behind this?" Danielle asked quietly. Claire's smile softened. "From the beginning." Danielle's voice trembled. "Why us?" Claire took a beat before answering. "Because he sees who the world forgets, and he remembers what it's like to be invisible." That silenced the room. Miles swung his legs from the exam table, unaware of the enormity of the moment. Dr. Reyes reached for a binder and opened it, flipping to a photo of the lab where the treatment had been developed. "We're not promising miracles," she said, "but we are promising to fight alongside you. No more battles alone." Danielle swallowed hard, nodding. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Claire stood and offered her hand again. "Then let's begin." They walked out of the clinic into the golden light of afternoon, Miles skipping a little despite his tired legs. Danielle lifted her eyes to the sky, letting the sunlight hit her face. Somewhere behind the scenes, a quiet man had set this in motion. And now, her son had a chance not just to survive, but to live. That evening, After dinner and after the kids were tucked in, Danielle sat alone on the back steps of their small home, the night air warm and humming with crickets. She held the program binder on her lap, flipping slowly through the pages by porch light. It was all there. Schedules, specialists, milestones. Real people behind the pages. Real plans. She didn't know how to process it all. Only days ago she was rationing Miles's medications, praying for another miracle. And now? Now a door had opened that she never knew existed. She looked up at the sky. It was something her mother used to do when life felt overwhelming. Just find the North Star, she'd said. It doesn't fix anything, but it reminds you you're not lost. Danielle closed the binder and hugged it to her chest. She wasn't lost anymore. Meanwhile, across the country, Keanu Reeves stood on a quiet rooftop in downtown LA, the city blinking beneath him. Nadine stood beside him, handing him the first preliminary report from Dr. Reyes. "She's confident," Nadine said. "Miles is responding faster than she expected." Keanu didn't smile, but the tightness in his shoulders eased. He looked out over the skyline and said only one thing. Good. Because to him, this wasn't about one child. It was about all the ones no one else saw. Danielle should have felt lighter after the visit to Emory. She should have been floating, radiant with relief. But just 2 days later, the world began pushing back. It started at Miles's school, of all places. She was in the front office dropping off a note about his therapy schedule when Mrs. Knoll, the assistant principal, gave her a tight, thin-lipped smile. "I heard you're working with a Hollywood actor?" she said, the word actor coated in disbelief. Danielle hesitated. Yes, his foundation reached out. They're helping cover Miles's medical treatment. Mrs. Knoll's brow lifted. "And you're certain it's legitimate?" Danielle blinked. "I've met the medical team. They're real. The clinic's real. We've already started evaluations." "Well," Mrs. Knoll said, tapping her fingers on the counter, "you'll forgive me for being cautious. We've had parents exaggerate before. These things can get messy." Danielle opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say? That Keanu Reeves himself had quietly intervened in her life? That a team of specialists was working without fanfare or billing codes? She gave a stiff nod and left the office, her chest tight. The next hit came from her sister. "Danielle, you need to be careful," Tasha warned over the phone that night. "These celebrity foundations, they sound good until you find yourself on the evening news." "It's not like that," Danielle said. "It's always like that," Tasha insisted. "They use your story, make themselves look good, then disappear when it's inconvenient." Danielle gripped the edge of the kitchen sink, staring down at a crusted dish she hadn't had time to scrub. "I've met the people. They're kind, real. I'm just saying, don't sign your life away without reading the fine print." The call ended with a forced goodbye. Danielle didn't mention that she'd already signed. She didn't mention how safe she felt in that office, how real Dr. Reyes' eyes had been when she spoke of hope. The next morning it was the hospital. Again. Even though Keanu's team had promised to handle it, the billing department at the local urgent care clinic sent another notice. Past due, $1,740.18. She called and explained again that a third party had taken over the account. She was met with cold indifference. "Until we have payment in full, Ms. Brooks, we'll continue to pursue collections." Danielle hung up, shaking, the shame wrapping itself around her throat like a noose. She wasn't stupid. She knew how the world worked. Help was always conditional, and people only cheered for you when you were rising, not while you were still crawling. The whispers grew louder. At the grocery store, Danielle caught 2 women glancing at her while loading her cart with produce. One of them murmured something under her breath and laughed. Danielle looked down at the grapes in her hand. Organic. She hadn't bought organic in 2 years. Claire had left her a prepaid card for groceries, insisting, "Let the kids eat clean." That's part of healing, too. She placed the grapes back on the shelf and picked the cheaper ones instead. She couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were always on her now, watching, doubting, waiting for her to trip. At church on Sunday, Pastor Neil brought up guarding our hearts against the promises of false idols. His words weren't aimed directly at her, but the timing stung. Especially when Sister June gave her a side glance as he spoke. Danielle sat stiff in the pew, jaw clenched, wondering how good news could feel so lonely. That afternoon, she found herself crying quietly in her room while the kids played Uno in the living room. She didn't want to doubt the help she'd received. She didn't want to let the fear win. But everything in her life had always come with a catch. What if this time was no different? What if it was all too good to be true? The knock on her door came just after sunset. She wasn't expecting anyone. She wiped her face, checked that Miles was settled with his cartoons, and opened the front door slowly. Keanu Reeves stood on the porch. No entourage, no cameras, just him, in a black hoodie and jeans, hands tucked into his pockets, looking quieter and more tired than the world usually saw him. "Miss Brooks?" he asked gently. She froze. "You're here?" "I heard things have been difficult," he said. She blinked fast. "You didn't have to come." He smiled, the kind that didn't reach the surface. "That's exactly why I did." He stepped inside only when invited, and she offered him a seat on the couch. Her hands trembled as she poured 2 glasses of water. Miles peeked from behind the hallway and gasped, "Mom, that's the movie guy." Keanu crouched, offered a wave. "Hey, little man." Miles grinned shyly. "You're real?" Keanu looked at Danielle, then back at Miles. "Very real." He turned back to her, his voice low and steady. "This isn't about rescue," he said. "It's about standing beside you, not just for the headlines, for the long road." Danielle wiped a tear away. Finally, someone who understood. They sat together in the quiet living room, the hum of cartoons drifting from down the hall where Miles had returned to the couch, his excitement settling into quiet awe. Danielle folded her hands in her lap. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to explode." Keanu shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize for asking for help." She studied his face, weathered, kind, and deeply sincere. "Everyone keeps telling me to be careful, that this kind of help can't be real." He didn't look offended. If anything, he looked sad. "I understand," he said. "A lot of people help loudly. I try to do the opposite." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I've seen what it means when someone feels seen for the first time. Without fanfare. Just presence." Danielle's throat tightened. "That's what this feels like. Presence. And it scares me because I've never had it without losing something." Keanu leaned forward. "You won't lose anything this time. We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to walk beside you, as long as it takes." Danielle's eyes welled again, but this time with something softer than grief, maybe even relief. He stood and looked toward the hallway. "Tell Miles we'll check in soon. There's more to come." Danielle rose too. "Why us? Really?" Keanu paused at the door. "Because sometimes the world forgets who matters. I try not to." And with that, he stepped into the night, leaving behind a silence that didn't ache, but healed. The first day of Miles's treatment began before sunrise. Danielle woke with her alarm, groggy but alert. She packed his bag carefully, his soft Iron Man blanket, a sketch pad, headphones, and the action figure he wouldn't sleep without. Nina helped while Darnell quietly made peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, sensing the weight of the day. By 7 a.m., they were at Emory. Dr. Reyes met them at the pediatric infusion wing with a small team of nurses, each one wearing a badge with Miles's name already printed in bold. Claire was there too, holding a coffee for Danielle and a soft smile for Miles. "You ready, champ?" she asked gently. Miles nodded, too brave for his age. "Do I get to pick the color of the bandage?" Claire grinned. "You absolutely do." The first round of the mitochondrial stabilizer was administered slowly, monitored by machines and humans alike. Danielle sat at his bedside, her hand holding his, her eyes flicking between the IV drip and the flush of his cheeks. The side effects started before the bag was empty. Nausea, a low-grade fever, chills. Miles whimpered, but didn't cry. He just squeezed Danielle's fingers tighter and whispered, "Don't let go." "I won't," she whispered back, brushing his forehead with her hand. The second day was worse. He could barely keep down fluids. He winced when light hit his eyes. His balance, already fragile, vanished, and he had to be carried to the bathroom. But he never complained, not once. Dr. Reyes adjusted the dosage, slowing the introduction of the compound to allow his body more time to adapt. "This is normal," she assured Danielle gently. "The protocol is aggressive, but it's the best option." Danielle nodded, but her heart twisted with every retch, every shiver, every moan. On the third day, Claire brought a small envelope. Inside was a note, written in simple handwriting. "Tell Miles I'm proud of him, okay?" Danielle smiled through her exhaustion. "Does he do that a lot?" Claire smiled back. "Only when it matters." Nina arrived after school, still in her uniform, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She sat beside Miles's bed while Danielle stepped out to stretch. "Mom says you're being a superhero," she whispered to her little brother. Miles blinked up at her. "Do superheroes throw up?" "Only the really strong ones." They laughed, just a little, and Nina reached into her bag, pulling out a small notebook. "Want to help me design your own superhero? You can tell me what powers you'd have." Miles's face lit up, even through his pale complexion. "Teleporting, so I don't have to ride in the car anymore." Nina drew a little boy in a cape, scribbling wildly with the colored pens Claire had brought earlier. Miles watched every line, even if he was too weak to hold a pen himself. When Danielle returned, she found them side by side, Nina drawing, Miles smiling softly. And for the first time in weeks, the heaviness in Danielle's chest eased just enough to breathe. The weekend brought a small miracle. Miles sat up on his own that Saturday morning. He asked for toast, plain with jelly. Danielle nearly cried as she watched him take careful bites, his hands trembling but steady enough to hold the plate. Dr. Reyes arrived later with a clipboard and a warm grin. "His mitochondrial response is stabilizing faster than we hoped. We'll still need to monitor closely, but this is a very good sign." Danielle placed her hand over her heart. "Thank you." "No," Dr. Reyes replied, looking at Miles. "Thank him. He's the fighter." That evening, Claire arrived with something unexpected: Keanu's guitar. "Hal asked if Miles liked music," she said. "He wanted to send this from his home studio. He said the strings are worn from a project he just finished. It helps him feel calm." Nina's eyes lit up. "Can I play it for him?" "Of course." Nina cradled the guitar with reverence and began to strum, soft chords echoing through the hospital room. Miles closed his eyes and smiled. The melody wove through the antiseptic air like a balm. Danielle watched the scene from the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her children had grown up in waiting rooms and under fluorescent lights, but here, in this room, something had changed. For the first time, they weren't just surviving. They were living. Still, the fear never fully left her. Late that night, as the machines beeped rhythmically and her children slept side by side on the hospital bed, Danielle stepped into the hallway with Claire. "I'm scared," she whispered. Claire didn't rush to reassure her. She just nodded. "I'd be more worried if you weren't." Danielle looked out the window at the quiet parking lot below. "Every time something good happens, I brace for the catch, for the thing that rips it all away." "There's no catch," Claire said gently. "But there is risk. That's what it means to hope again. It's not weakness, Danielle. It's courage." Danielle nodded slowly. "Tell Keanu thank you," she said. "Not just for the medicine or the money, for letting us breathe." Claire smiled. "He'd say it's not about letting you breathe. It's about making sure the world stops long enough to notice that you were suffocating." The words struck deep. As Claire disappeared down the hallway, Danielle walked back into the room and sat by her son's side, holding his hand through the wires and the wonder. And for the first time in a long time, She let herself believe. It started with a twitch. Miles was coloring quietly beside Danielle, hunched over a cartoon sketch of his superhero persona, Captain Flashlight, defender of nighttime fears. They were 3 weeks into treatment, and though the days were still hard, there had been more good than bad. Danielle dared to believe they were over the worst of it. Then his hand jerked. Danielle barely noticed. She thought he'd just dropped his crayon. But then it happened again. And again. "Miles?" she asked softly. His eyes blinked once, then widened. "Mom? My arms feel weird." Then he collapsed. The seizure rolled in like a wave, violent, fast, and merciless. His body shook uncontrollably, eyes fluttering, jaw clenched. Danielle screamed for help. Within seconds, a nurse hit the emergency button on the wall, and the room was swarmed by medical staff. Danielle stood frozen, helpless, as they lifted Miles onto the stretcher, stabilizing him, shouting numbers and codes she didn't understand. She wasn't allowed to follow him into the ICU. The doors slammed shut in her face. She sank to the floor. Claire found her minutes later, sitting with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. "They won't let me in," Danielle said, her voice hollow. "He was getting better. I swear he was." Claire didn't offer empty reassurance. She simply placed a hand on Danielle's shoulder and stayed there, anchored in the chaos. Inside, Dr. Reyes worked furiously, her brow tense as she monitored Miles's vitals and adjusted his IV meds. Danielle was eventually moved to a waiting room down the hall. Claire brought her tea she didn't drink, tissues she didn't touch. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she kept glancing at the wall clock like it could change something. Then the elevator chimed. Danielle barely looked up, but Claire did, and stood. Keanu Reeves stepped into the room without a word. He didn't draw attention. He didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside her. Danielle didn't speak at first. She didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was weighted with understanding. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Finally, she whispered, "I thought he was getting stronger." Keanu looked at her gently. "He is. This isn't failure. It's part of the battle." She let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in her chest for years. "I'm not asking for rescue," she said. "I know," Keanu replied. "I'm just here." And that made all the difference. The clock ticked on. Every second stretched into hours. Every hallway footstep made Danielle flinch. She tried to brace herself for every possible outcome, good, bad, or unbearable. But her thoughts kept looping to the sound of Miles's head hitting the pillow as his body convulsed. "I was just drawing," she whispered. Keanu, still beside her, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his voice quiet. "The night my best friend died, we'd been talking about what to eat for dinner." Danielle turned toward him. "I didn't know it was coming," he continued. "Didn't know how final the last normal moment would feel until later." She stared at him. "So what do you do with that?" "I hold on to the dinner conversation," he said. "Not the moment he stopped breathing, the one before." Danielle let those words settle. In a world where so many tried to distract her, fix her, or preach to her, Keanu simply shared, sat with her, held space, with no expectation of being thanked. A nurse finally stepped into the room. "He's stable," she said. "Dr. Reyes will explain more soon, but the seizures passed. He's resting." Danielle broke into tears, and this time, she didn't hide them. Keanu didn't reach out to fix it, didn't offer platitudes. He just stayed. An hour later, Danielle stood by Miles's ICU bed. He was pale and weak, the IV lines looking too big against his small arms. Machines beeped in steady rhythm, a sound Danielle had come to both dread and cherish. Dr. Reyes stood nearby, calm but firm. The seizure was likely triggered by a sudden neurological response to the treatment. It's not unexpected, though it came sooner than we predicted. "Is this a sign it's failing?" Danielle asked, her voice tight. Dr. Reyes shook her head. "No." His vitals stabilized faster than expected. His body fought hard. We're adjusting the protocol to lower his risk. But this isn't a step backward. It's just a sharp curve forward. Danielle looked down at her son's sleeping face. She reached out and gently brushed a curl from his forehead. "I'm still scared," she said. "That's okay," Dr. Reyes replied. "So are we. But we're also hopeful, and we're not going anywhere." Later, as Danielle stepped outside for air, she found Keanu still sitting near the lobby, alone now, hood drawn low over his brow. She walked over quietly. "You could have left hours ago." "I know. You really don't like being the center of attention, do you?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Not when it comes to people's pain. I just want you to know you're not alone in it." Danielle sat beside him. "You're not what I expected." "Good," he said, and for the first time she laughed. In that moment, under the dull glow of the hospital's exterior lights, she realized something deeper than gratitude. She wasn't just part of someone else's charity or mission. She was part of a quiet revolution, where listening mattered more than fixing, where being present was its own form of power. And Keanu Reeves, the quiet man who changed everything, wasn't a savior. He was something rarer, a witness. It started with another email. Danielle almost deleted it on sight. She'd received dozens over the last few weeks, media inquiries, blog requests, podcast invites. Some came with flattery, others with promises, all with an undercurrent of extraction. They wanted a piece of her struggle, a slice of her pain for clicks and headlines. But this one was different. Subject line: "From one sister to another." The body of the message was short and simple. "Ms. Brooks, I lost my brother to a condition much like Miles's. He didn't get the kind of help you're getting, because no one was listening back then. I'm not here to exploit you. I'm here to help tell your story in a way that respects your strength. No gotcha moments, no twisted edits, just truth, from one black woman to another. Cassandra Green, senior reporter, The Atlanta Gazette." Danielle sat with the email for a long time, her cursor hovering over the delete button, then over reply. She did neither. Instead, she walked down the hall, where Miles was asleep and Nina was working on homework at the foot of his bed. "You ever hear of Cassandra Green?" Danielle asked. Nina looked up. "She's the one who wrote the article about that girl who died after getting turned away from a hospital, right?" Danielle nodded slowly. She hadn't realized Nina read the news that closely, but of course she did. Nina had grown up fast. Her life demanded it. Danielle reread the email again later that night and finally sent a reply. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll talk." The meeting was set for 2 days later at a coffee shop across from the hospital. Cassandra arrived exactly on time. She wore a gray blazer over a black t-shirt that read, "Dignity is not optional." Her hair was braided back, her eyes sharp but kind. She didn't extend a recorder or a notepad. She extended her hand. "Thank you for even considering this," she said. Danielle nodded. "I get a lot of these." "I know," Cassandra said. "That's why I didn't lead with a pitch. I wanted to lead with truth." They ordered coffee and sat near the window. Danielle kept her coat on, arms crossed. Guarded but open enough to hear what this woman had to say. "My brother's name was Malik," Cassandra said softly. "He was diagnosed with mitochondrial disease when he was 10. There wasn't a trial for him, no Keanu Reeves, just me and my mom, fighting a system that didn't want to see us." Danielle studied her face. There was no self-pity there, just experience. And something else. "Why do you want this story?" she asked. Cassandra leaned forward. "Because people need to know what it feels like when the world finally listens. Your story isn't just about a miracle. It's about what happens when people stop turning away. I want to document that shift." Respectfully, Danielle looked down at her coffee. "No cameras in the hospital. No surprise angles. I don't want to be a headline. I want to be a mother." Cassandra nodded. "You set the terms. I follow." And in that quiet, mutual agreement, something began to shift. The next afternoon, Cassandra arrived at the hospital, not as a journalist with a crew, but as a quiet visitor with a small bouquet of sunflowers and a children's book under her arm. "From one hospital sibling to another," she said, handing the book to Nina. "Malik used to love this one." Nina, who had been so protective lately, blinked at the gesture. "Thanks," she said softly, then disappeared back into Miles's room without a word. Danielle led Cassandra to the family lounge. It was late in the day, the window casting a golden light across the carpet. "I don't know how to do this," Danielle admitted. "It's all moving so fast. Yesterday I was filling out Medicaid forms. Today, Keanu Reeves is texting my daughter." Cassandra smiled. "You don't need to know how, you just need to speak." Danielle sat. "If we do this, I want it to mean something. I want it to help someone besides me." "It will," Cassandra promised. "I'm not writing a puff piece. I'm writing the truth. The system that failed you, the community that rallied, the kindness that showed up when no one expected it, and the cost, especially the cost." Danielle looked at her, eyes glassy. "Okay, but we do this on paper. No interviews yet, no cameras. I want my kids to stay kids." Cassandra opened her notebook and jotted down a line. "Understood." They talked for over an hour, about Miles, about Nina, about the eviction notice Danielle had burned, about the night the tweet was sent, about the moment hope cracked her wide open. But it wasn't just an interview. It was something else. By the end, Cassandra wasn't just a reporter, she was an ally. Later that night, Danielle told Nina about the interview plans. "Do you trust her?" Nina asked. "I think I do," Danielle said. "And that's not something I say lightly." Nina sat for a moment, then nodded. "Then I trust her too." As they settled into bed that night, Miles sleeping beside them, Danielle checked her phone. A new message from Claire. "He said to tell you, the right stories told the right way can change lives." Danielle smiled. She texted back, "Tell him this one's going to be told our way." Because this story didn't belong to cameras or sound bites. It belonged to them, and they were just beginning to tell it. Cassandra's story dropped on a Wednesday morning. It wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic trailers, no swelling background music. Just a quiet header on the Atlanta Gazette's website. The price of survival, one mother's fight to save her son, and what it says about the rest of us. Danielle stared at the screen, heart pounding. The byline read, "Cassandra Green." Beside it, a small caption, "This story contains no advertisements, no paywalls, and no sponsors. It is being shared freely." She clicked. The article opened with a photo Cassandra had taken, with Danielle's permission. Miles sleeping in his hospital bed, his superhero drawing taped to the IV pole. From the first sentence, it was clear this wasn't a feel-good fluff piece. Cassandra wrote with precision and fury, but also with grace. She told Danielle's story exactly as she had promised. No embellishment, no dramatization, just truth. She wrote about Danielle's sleepless nights, Nina's forced maturity, the seizure that nearly stole everything, and the moment a single tweet cracked the silence that surrounded their lives. But the article didn't stop there. Cassandra laid bare the systems that had failed Danielle and families like hers. She exposed the staggering costs of rare disease treatments. She cited studies on racial disparities in pediatric care. She quoted doctors, policy experts, and patients. She named hospitals that had turned Danielle away before Keanu's team stepped in. And then, quietly, she revealed his involvement. Not with fanfare, not with hype, just a short paragraph. The man who responded wasn't a superhero in a cape. He was a quiet actor with a history of anonymous giving who, when faced with the story of a mother on the edge, chose not to look away. Within 2 hours, the article had been shared over 10,000 times. By noon, it was trending on Twitter. By 5 p.m., celebrities were reposting it with messages of support. A CNN anchor quoted a line from Cassandra's piece on air. "Hope shouldn't require hashtags to be heard." Danielle's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in. Some from strangers, others from former classmates, old co-workers, nurses who remembered Miles from past visits. People weren't just reacting with sympathy, they were reacting with action. Donations surged to a fund Claire had quietly set up in Miles's name. Parents began sharing their own stories in the comments, many echoing Cassandra's message. This isn't charity, this is what care should look like. And then something unexpected happened. Keanu Reeves broke his silence. Not through a press conference or an agent, but through a letter posted on his official website, rarely updated and usually reserved for personal reflections. The letter was just 5 paragraphs, but it shook the internet. I didn't help Danielle because I'm famous. I helped because I could. Because families like hers shouldn't have to beg for dignity. They shouldn't have to go viral to be heard. Hope should not be a privilege. If this story has moved you, don't just share it. Change something. Support something. Stand with someone. Because Danielle and her children aren't rare. They're just usually invisible. Let's make them seen. Keanu Reeves. The aftermath was unlike anything Danielle had imagined. The next morning, she awoke to a message from Claire. Turn on the news. Every major network was talking about it. Not just about Miles or Danielle's tweet, but about the bigger message. The failure of the system. The ripple effect of Keanu's letter. Politicians weighed in. Senators tweeted their support. One governor proposed new legislation that same afternoon to review rare disease coverage in state Medicaid programs. Danielle sat on the edge of her bed, stunned, as Nina read aloud tweets from doctors, social workers, even CEOs. It's like someone turned on the lights, Nina said. Claire arrived at the hospital with Cassandra and a box of print copies of the article. Cassandra's editor had ordered a limited run after demand exploded. On the front page, Miles's superhero drawing stared out at the world. I've never had a piece do this, Cassandra whispered. Danielle didn't know what to say. She was grateful, but also overwhelmed. This wasn't just her life anymore. It was a mirror reflecting 1,000 other lives. People were reaching out from across the country, even from abroad. Messages like, "My daughter died waiting for care. Thank you for making them listen." Reading this gave me the courage to speak out. I've been Danielle. I still am. But not all of it was beautiful. Some accused her of being opportunistic. Others questioned the truth of her story. A few cruel voices made their way into her inbox, telling her she didn't deserve Keanu's help. Danielle sat with Cassandra late one night, scrolling through both the praise and the hate. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. You don't need to be cut out for it, Cassandra said. You just need to keep showing up. Because this is what change looks like before it's neat and tidy. A few days later, a delivery arrived at the hospital. Flowers, toys, letters from other children who'd seen the article. Miles, now recovering from his seizure, smiled weakly as he held up a card that read, "You're my hero, Captain Flashlight." Danielle pressed her hand to her heart. Then came another surprise. A call from the National Children's Health Summit. They wanted Danielle to speak, not just about her experience, but about what parents really needed. They'd already arranged for Cassandra to moderate the panel. Claire would accompany her. Why me? Danielle asked. Because no one listens better than a mother who's had to scream to be heard, Cassandra replied. Danielle hesitated. She was just starting to breathe again, but something inside her, the same thing that had made her hit send on that late-night tweet, rose up. I'll do it, she said, but only if Miles can be there. People need to see who we're fighting for. And so just a few weeks later, she stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., her heart pounding as she looked out at a room full of lawmakers, activists, and journalists. Behind her, on a projector screen, was the image that had started it all. Miles, smiling through wires and monitors, holding up a drawing of a superhero. Danielle took a breath. Then she began to speak. Danielle never wanted a microphone. She never imagined herself on panels or in news clips, quoted in headlines or invited to strategy meetings with healthcare executives. She wasn't looking for spotlight. She just wanted her son to live. But something had shifted. The day she stood on that stage in Washington, looking out over a sea of faces, parents, lawmakers, doctors, she realized that silence had never protected her. It had only isolated her. Now, every time she told her story, another woman stepped out of the shadows. Her inbox flooded with messages from mothers just like her, from fathers who didn't know how to fight, from siblings who grew up too fast, just like Nina. They all said the same thing. You said what I've been living. So Danielle started to show up. She spoke at town halls and healthcare roundtables. She met with nonprofit leaders working to close racial gaps in pediatric care. She sat on a panel at a university where a nervous young pre-med student approached her afterward and said, "You just changed how I'll treat my future patients." But it wasn't about the recognition, not once. It was about making the system feel what she had felt, making them see what they refused to see. Danielle also joined a virtual support group that Claire had recommended, a private circle of mothers from across the country navigating life with medically complex children. The group met once a week on video chat. No reporters, no observers, just raw, unfiltered honesty. She listened to a mother from Ohio cry over losing her job when her son's treatments became too frequent, to a grandmother in Alabama struggling to find a specialist for her 4-year-old, to a teen mom in Texas who didn't know how to read insurance paperwork. And for the first time, Danielle didn't feel alone in the dark. One night, after a particularly emotional session, she stayed on the call a little longer. The screen had gone quiet except for a few stragglers. Someone said, "You should run the group." Danielle laughed. "I can barely keep my laundry folded." But the words stuck. She wasn't a leader in the traditional sense. But she had walked through the fire, and now people saw her as someone who knew where the water was. Back home, Nina was starting to find her voice too. At school, she gave a speech at a student rally about how illness had shaped her life, and not just through hardship, but through compassion. "It taught me how to care for someone deeply," she said. "It made me brave." Her classmates listened. Teachers hugged her afterward. The principal called Danielle the next morning and said, "Your daughter reminded us all what resilience looks like." Danielle cried in her car after that call, not from sadness, from the sheer, staggering relief of seeing her children bloom again after so much pain. 2 weeks later, the support group held its first in-person gathering, a weekend retreat tucked away in the quiet hills of northern Georgia. No cameras, no headlines, just parents, children, and the thick, tender weight of shared experience. Danielle had hesitated to go. Miles was still recovering, and the thought of leaving the comfort of their new routine unnerved her. But Claire had reassured her. Everything would be arranged. Nurses would be on site. There would be restrooms near every cabin, counselors on hand, soft foods, quiet corners. It was built for them. Danielle brought Miles, Nina, and even her mother, who had been having a string of good days. They were assigned a small cabin with a porch swing and a view of the woods. It was the first time Danielle had seen Miles smile while touching leaves, rather than watching them from behind a hospital window. The first night, the families gathered in a circle under twinkling fairy lights strung between tall pines. No agenda, just a microphone, passed hand to hand. Some shared stories, others just wept, and some, like Danielle, simply sat still, letting the silence carry meaning. Then, about halfway through the evening, a gentle hush fell over the group. A familiar figure stepped quietly into the circle, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes soft behind weary lines. Keanu Reeves? He didn't speak at first. He just looked around, at the faces, the children, the worn but unbroken parents, and nodded in greeting. Claire stepped forward to introduce him, but Keanu shook his head. "No introduction," he said quietly. "Just here to listen." And he did. He sat cross-legged on a blanket beside Danielle and Nina, close enough that Miles could see him and offer a small wave. Keanu smiled and waved back. No pretense, no performance, just presence. When the microphone came to him, he took it with both hands and looked at the circle. "My sister was sick for most of her life," he said. "And we didn't always know what to do. Sometimes the doctors didn't either. But the hardest part was feeling invisible, like the world had already moved on." He paused, the firelight dancing across his face. "So I want to say something that I hope you'll hear in the way it's meant," he continued. "You're not invisible. Not anymore. And you shouldn't have to be brave just to be seen." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a woman to his right whispered, "Thank you." Keanu nodded, handed off the microphone, and sat quietly again. No more words, just listening. That night, Danielle sat with Nina on the porch swing of their cabin. Miles was asleep inside, curled under a blanket with stars on it. "Do you think this is what healing feels like?" Nina asked. Danielle took her daughter's hand. "Maybe, or maybe it's just what happens when we stop hiding." Nina looked out at the firelight flickering between trees. "I hope it never ends." Danielle smiled, a quiet strength in her chest that hadn't been there before. "Me too," she said. "Me too." It started with a wobble. Danielle was folding laundry in the living room when she heard Nina shout from the hallway, "Mom, come here, right now." Her heart leapt into her throat. For a split second, she imagined the worst. Miles collapsed, another seizure, another trip to the hospital. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran. But when she turned the corner, what she saw made her freeze in place. Miles was standing. Not just standing, walking. One small shaky step after another, barefoot on the hallway carpet, arms out for balance, eyes wide with surprise and focus. He was walking, without a walker, without Nina holding his hands, without needing to brace against the wall. Just him, moving forward. Danielle gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Miles?" He looked up at her, wobbling a little but determined. "Mommy," he said. "I'm doing it." She dropped to her knees, tears already spilling down her cheeks as she opened her arms wide. He moved toward her, step, pause, step, and fell into her embrace with a giggle. "I did it," he whispered into her neck. Danielle held him so tight she was afraid she might crush him. "Yes, baby, you did." Nina clapped her hands, crying and laughing all at once. "He just got up, Mom. He didn't even tell me. Just got up and started walking." Danielle buried her face in Miles's curls, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of the moment. How many times had she dreamed of this, of seeing him take just one unassisted step? Now he had taken 5. And she'd almost missed it because she was doing laundry. They spent the next 10 minutes replaying the scene, cheering him on, laughing as he strutted from the hallway to the living room, then back again. He stumbled twice, caught himself once, and at the end of it all, flopped down on the couch like a conquering king. "I'm tired," he said, grinning. "You've earned it," Danielle said, brushing a curl off his forehead. That night, after the kids went to bed, she sat on the porch in the cooling Georgia evening, staring out at the yard. Her heart was still racing, not from fear this time, but from wonder. The kind of awe that comes when you realize you've been holding your breath for months, and for the first time, you're allowed to exhale. Claire had told her the treatment might work. Dr. Reyes had given her data and cautious optimism. Cassandra had said, "You're making history." But nothing could have prepared her for the moment when her son, her baby, walked toward her under his own power. It wasn't just a step. It was a message. We're still here. We're still fighting. And now, we're moving forward. She wiped her eyes and whispered to the dark sky, "Thank you." And though she didn't know who she was thanking exactly, God, science, Keanu, all of the above, it didn't matter. Gratitude doesn't always need a name. The next week was filled with little miracles. Danielle noticed it in the way Miles reached for his cereal spoon with confidence, in how he climbed up onto the couch without asking for help, how his voice, always a bit shy and breathy, now rang clearer when he told knock-knock jokes at breakfast. Nina laughed more often too, Not just polite chuckles to make others feel okay, but real belly laughs, the kind that echoed through the house and reminded Danielle of the girl she used to be before hospitals and waiting rooms became their routine. Even Danielle's mother had moments of sharpness that startled her. One afternoon, while helping Miles with a coloring book, she looked up and said, "I remember when you used to sit just like that, Danielle, always with your tongue poking out while you colored." She smiled. "You were always so serious." Danielle had to turn away to hide the tears that came too fast. One evening they had a visitor. It was Claire first, stepping onto the porch like she always did, graceful, unassuming. But behind her, walking slowly up the drive with a brown bag in hand, was Keanu. Danielle blinked. "He's here?" "He wanted to bring dinner," Claire said with a warm smile. "No press, just dinner." Danielle felt her heart stutter for a beat. It wasn't that she was starstruck. By now she had long stopped seeing him as Keanu Reeves, movie star. He was just Keanu, quiet, present, kind. But having him at her table felt like something sacred. He stepped onto the porch and handed her the bag. "Hope you like Thai," he said, soft as ever. Miles poked his head out the door. "Uncle K." Danielle froze. She hadn't taught him that, hadn't even heard him say it before, but the name rolled off his tongue like it had always been there. Keanu blinked, surprised, then smiled, full and unguarded. "Uncle K, huh? I like that." Miles grabbed his hand and tugged him inside. Dinner was simple but warm. They sat at the table like any family. Nina talking about her latest school project, Danielle passing around spring rolls, Claire quietly refilling glasses of water. Keanu asked questions gently, never pushing. He laughed at Miles's stories, listened intently to Danielle's updates about his treatment, and even helped dry dishes afterward. At one point, while Miles played on the floor with his toy astronauts, Keanu sat beside Danielle on the porch steps. "You look lighter," he said softly. Danielle nodded. "I think, for the first time in years, I'm not just surviving." He didn't say anything in response, just nodded, his gaze on the stars. Later, as he was leaving, Miles ran up and hugged him tightly. "You gonna come back, right?" he asked. Keanu leaned down, hand resting gently on the boy's back. "Whenever you need me, buddy." Danielle stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with a strange ache in her chest. Part joy, part disbelief. Life had changed. And not just in the ways the world could see. It was in the way they laughed, in the way they rested, in the way they lived. For the first time, in what felt like forever, they had better days. That night, after the dishes were done and Miles had fallen asleep on the couch with his astronaut in hand, Danielle sat with Nina in the living room. They didn't talk much. The lights were low and the TV played quietly in the background. But the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, comfortable. "I like when it's like this," Nina said, leaning her head on her mom's shoulder. Danielle smiled, brushing a braid off her daughter's forehead. "Me too." She looked around the room, at the glow of the nightlight reflecting off the kitchen tile, at the soft breathing of her mother, napping in the recliner, at the peace that had finally crept into every corner of the house. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still treatments, still hard days ahead. But there was laughter now. There was hope. And hope changes everything. She kissed Nina's forehead and whispered, "Go on to bed, sweet girl." Nina stood, gave her one last hug, and tiptoed upstairs. Danielle lingered on the couch a while longer, watching Miles sleep, his chest rising and falling in that slow, steady rhythm that used to feel like a miracle. Now, it felt like life. And life, for once, felt good. The camera pans in on Danielle's face, not in her kitchen, not at the hospital, but in front of a wooden nameplate etched with her full name. Danielle Brooks, advocate and mother. Behind her, rows of lawmakers fill the hearing chamber. Bright lights from news cameras bounce off the polished wood walls. A low buzz of murmurs gives the room an undercurrent of tension. Cassandra's story had done more than go viral. It had ignited a fire. Her investigative piece, which aired nationally under the title The Diagnosis Divide, opened with images of Miles walking, then pulled viewers into the harrowing months that preceded that moment. It didn't pull punches. It showed the disparity, how race, income, and geography decided whether a child would live or be lost in bureaucratic silence. By the time the segment ended, it had over 30 million views online. Congress took notice. So did advocacy groups, and pediatric hospitals, and even skeptical journalists who once dismissed Danielle's story as a feel-good fluke. Now Danielle sat before the House Committee on Health Policy, water glass trembling slightly in her hands as she opened her statement. My name is Danielle Brooks. I'm a single mother of 3. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I've never spoken to Congress before today, but I know what it means to beg an insurance company to keep your child alive. She paused, hands folded tightly on the table. Her voice didn't shake, but her chest burned with every word. I know what it's like to choose between paying for medication or rent. I know what it's like to have a doctor tell you there's a treatment, but your zip code makes it out of reach. Behind her, Nina sat upright, clutching a framed photo of Miles. In it, he was wearing his hospital gown and grinning with 2 missing teeth. I'm not here asking for charity, Danielle said, voice rising. I'm asking for a change in how we see families like mine. One of the congresswomen leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, can you describe how the system failed your family? Danielle drew a breath. It didn't just fail us. It forgot us. And if not for a stranger who chose to listen, my son wouldn't be here today. Danielle looked down for a second, then back up at the room full of suits and pens and polished shoes. My son Miles was born with a rare disorder most doctors couldn't even pronounce without checking their notes, she continued. It affects his muscles, his coordination, and until recently, it dictated every part of his life. She tapped her fingers once, slowly, to keep pace with her breath. When the treatments first started coming out, we were told we didn't qualify. Wrong zip code, wrong insurance, wrong everything. And every time I asked why, I got the same answer. We're sorry. There's nothing we can do. She locked eyes with the senator in the front row. Well, I'm here today because someone did do something. Because a man who didn't owe me or my children anything, who's never asked for a moment of credit, saw a mother drowning and quietly reached out a hand. Keanu, sitting in the back of the chamber, said nothing, but his hands rested on his knees, steady and still. Danielle went on. I'm not here because Keanu Reeves saved my child. I'm here because a broken system nearly took him away. And the only reason Miles is alive, the only reason I'm standing here today, is because someone listened when nobody else would. Her voice thickened, but she kept going. There are thousands of mothers just like me, fathers, grandparents, caregivers, who are trying to do everything right, who are working 2 or 3 jobs and still can't afford to keep their children alive. She reached down, pulled out a manila folder, and placed it on the table. In here are the names of 62 families I've spoken to in the last 3 months, all with children who share some version of Miles's condition. Most of them still can't access the treatment because they didn't go viral, because they didn't have a Claire or a Cassandra, because they're still invisible. A hush fell over the room. She took one final breath. I'm asking you to change that, not just for Miles, but for all of them. A beat of silence. Then a low murmur of voices and the faint shuffle of papers. Nina reached forward and squeezed her mother's hand. You did great, she whispered. Danielle closed her eyes for just a second, and in that sliver of quiet, she could almost hear Miles's voice. Mommy, I'm walking. After the hearing adjourned, the cameras descended like birds, but Danielle walked out with her head held high, Nina still holding the photo of Miles like it was a shield made of hope. Reporters shouted questions, microphones pushed forward, but Danielle said nothing. She didn't need to. The story had already been told. By the next morning, her testimony was on every major network. It was replayed in classrooms, shared on podcasts, and posted with captions like, "The most powerful 3 minutes you'll hear this year." Cassandra's follow-up piece went live that afternoon. It ended with a quiet shot of Danielle hugging Miles on their front porch, the caption reading, "A mother, a voice, a movement." And then, something happened that no one saw coming. In a short press release just 4 sentences long, Keanu Reeves announced the creation of the Miles Brooks Foundation grant, a multi-million-dollar fund dedicated to supporting families navigating rare pediatric diagnoses. No press conference, no red carpet, no photo op. Just a statement. This is not about charity. It's about justice. Every child deserves a chance. The grant would help cover travel, treatment, child care, and advocacy support. It was structured to last, built to grow, and every recipient letter would be signed, simply, in honor of Miles. And in the hearts of thousands of families, something shifted. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of a revolution. 3 months after Danielle's congressional testimony, something unusual arrived in her mailbox. Not a bill, not another form letter from insurance, but a hand-dressed envelope. Inside was a simple note, written in neat script. Let's build something, not just for Miles, for all of them. It was from Cassandra Green. 2 days later, Cassandra and Dr. Sophia Reyes met Danielle at the quiet little coffee shop near the hospital where Miles had spent so many nights. Danielle had brought a notebook, still half girl of advocacy notes, and a doodle Miles had drawn on the back cover. A big smiling sun with arms stretched wide. Sophia opened with a gentle smile. "We've seen what's possible when the right people care. But too many families still don't know where to turn." Cassandra leaned in. "What if we created something permanent, not another foundation with red carpets, a real place, a sanctuary, a support system that lives in the quiet?" Danielle didn't need convincing. She'd already been dreaming it. They named it the Quiet Light, a phrase that came from one of Cassandra's articles about the unseen strength of caregivers and the silent endurance of sick children. Light not blinding or loud, but constant, steady. Like a porch light left on for someone trying to find their way home. Within weeks, they had a space, a former arts center in an underserved part of the city. It had high windows, worn wood floors, and rooms that echoed with the potential for something meaningful. Danielle, Cassandra, and Dr. Reyes poured themselves into it. A space for parent advocates, a small room with toys and weighted blankets, a quiet office where insurance paperwork could be decoded, a grief circle on Thursday nights, a resource center with both laptops and tissues. No red tape, no judgment, just help. They kept the staff lean. Volunteers made up most of the team. Nina became one of the first. Every Saturday, she showed up early to restock shelves and greet new families. She had a gift with the kids, especially the ones too scared to speak. She'd sit beside them, draw with them, let them borrow Miles's old coloring books if they forgot theirs. Danielle would catch her daughter laughing and sometimes had to turn away, because that sound, Nina's unfiltered joy, felt like another kind of healing. The Quiet Light grew faster than they imagined, not because of headlines, but because word spread among the right people. The tired ones, the desperate ones, the parents sitting in emergency rooms with nowhere else to go. The ones who had stopped asking for help because they'd stopped believing anyone was listening. And somehow the Quiet Light heard them. Every new visitor was greeted like family. Volunteers brought homemade meals. Local doctors offered free consults. A wall in the back held Polaroids of kids, some in wheelchairs, some in superhero costumes, all smiling. In the center of that collage was Miles. He didn't mind. In fact, he loved it. At 7 years old, he'd become the unofficial ambassador of the building. He'd sit cross-legged on the welcome rug, showing new kids where the good crayons were, or how to fold the origami cranes that decorated the front windows. He'd point to the wall sometimes and say, "That's my picture, but you're going to be up there too." One afternoon, Cassandra returned from a trip to DC with exciting news. Their nonprofit had just secured its first state-backed partnership for medical travel assistance. Danielle teared up. "I didn't think it would happen so soon." Cassandra smiled. That's what happens when truth speaks clearly. What the public didn't know was that Keanu had been there from the beginning. Not with cameras, never with press. He quietly joined the board under the name K. Charles, a middle name few even knew he had. He funded most of the operational costs in the first year, covered insurance gaps for families that fell through the system, and occasionally sent handwritten notes to volunteers with simple messages. Thank you for showing up. He visited only once. No fanfare, no announcements. Just slipped in through the back door on a Tuesday afternoon, nodded at Cassandra and Danielle, and sat quietly at the parent roundtable as one father wept, describing his son's third failed surgery. When the man finished speaking, Keanu didn't offer platitudes. He just said, "I hear you." That was all. Later, Nina found him alone in the kitchen, washing dishes after a potluck. "You know you don't have to do that, right?" she said, teasing. He looked up, a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "I know, but it helps me feel human." Danielle would never forget that. The quiet light wasn't about miracles. It was about being seen, being heard. And for the first time in years, families like hers weren't in the shadows anymore. They were building something that would last. Together. The kitchen was dim. A flickering bulb above the stove offered the only light, casting long shadows over bills spread across the counter like landmines. Danielle sat in her old chair, the one with the uneven leg, her thumb hovering above the glowing screen of her phone. Miles had just drifted off, curled beneath his faded rocket ship comforter. His breathing was steady now. But that hadn't always been the case. Danielle looked down at the tweet she'd typed hours earlier but hadn't sent. She read it again. At Keanu Reeves, "I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I'm a single mom of 3. My youngest, Miles, has a rare disease. Insurance won't cover most of it. We're drowning. I heard you help people in quiet ways. If there's anything you can do, anything at all, we'd be grateful, thank you." She stared at it. It felt foolish, desperate. She wasn't the kind of person who begged strangers, especially celebrities, for help. And yet, her finger trembled. She hit send. The moment felt like giving up. But really, it was the beginning. Present day. Laughter echoed down the hallway. High-pitched, unfiltered joy. Miles' laughter. Danielle stood in the doorway, watching him zoom through the house with a cardboard box on his head. Spaceship helmet, he explained earlier, before crashing into a pile of pillows on the living room floor. Nina sat cross-legged nearby, helping him tape fins to the back of the box. "You need thrusters," she said. "Thrusters," Miles repeated. Danielle wiped her hands on a dish towel, leaned on the counter, and let the moment settle. The house smelled like cinnamon oatmeal. The sun spilled through the windows, and for the first time in forever, she felt whole. The front door opened and Cassandra stepped in, waving a manila envelope. "Grant approvals just came in. You'll want to see this." Danielle took it, heart racing, and slowly flipped through the stack. 12 families. Approved. Flights, hotels, treatments, all covered. Each one with a story that mirrored hers. Each one sparked by one thing. One small message. Cassandra's voiceover began as soft piano music played behind a video montage produced for the Quiet Light's first anniversary. It started with a black screen, then a single white tweet. Danielle's message. No music yet, just Cassandra's steady, warm voice. It started with one small message. The screen faded into a smiling child walking down a hospital hallway, gripping a nurse's hand, and someone who cared enough to answer. Next came a mother in Detroit holding up a grant letter, tears running down her cheeks, as her daughter, thin but beaming, held a teddy bear in a chemo chair. Then, a father in Albuquerque hugging Dr. Reyes after being told his son would be part of a clinical trial. A quick cut to volunteers folding care kits. A teenage girl reading to her brother in a hospital bed. A toddler learning to walk with braces, squealing with delight. Every face, every hand held, every hug. None of it would have existed without that late-night tweet. in Danielle's dark kitchen. In the final scene, the video returned to present day. Danielle, Cassandra, and Dr. Reyes planting a tree in front of the quiet light. Miles stood beside them in a tiny vest, a ribbon in his hand. When Danielle nodded, he snipped the ribbon. The tree was young, barely taller than Miles, but it was growing, and so were they. The screen faded to white. Cassandra's final words echoed in the background. You never know what a single message can become when it's answered with grace. As applause erupted from the back of the room, Danielle sat in the front row, her hand over her heart. Nina leaned over and whispered, I think you started a revolution. Danielle shook her head gently, eyes misty. No, baby, she said. We started it together. The early morning light stretched long shadows across the sidewalk outside the Quiet Light Foundation. The breeze carried the scent of fresh soil and spring blossoms from the front garden, and a quiet stillness hung in the air, one filled not with silence, but with peace. Danielle stood at the edge of the steps, her hand resting lightly on Miles's shoulder. He had just finished breakfast inside with a group of other children, each of them with their own battles, each of them still standing. Miles, now 7, was stronger than she ever imagined he'd be. The boy who once needed help to sit upright for more than 10 minutes was now walking unaided, his steps deliberate, his face open to the world. His curls bounced with every step. His laughter, which used to be fleeting between hospital visits, now came easily. Danielle watched him take a few more steps forward, his backpack snug on his shoulders, before he turned around and smiled. Coming, Mom? She nodded, blinking fast. Right behind you, baby. Her hand fell away from his shoulder, slowly, reverently, like letting go of a moment she wasn't ready to end. But that was motherhood, holding tight until it was time to release, and this was the right time. Inside the foundation's main room, the morning group was gathering. Parents, volunteers, doctors, children, all seated in a half circle near the window, where the sun made the floors glow. As Danielle approached, she passed the bulletin board by the entry. On it, a laminated printout of her tweet still hung in the center. The words hadn't changed, but the world around them had. Cassandra gave her a wave from across the room, then held up a notepad. Media training this afternoon, she mouthed with a playful smirk. Danielle rolled her eyes, smiled, and nodded. Public speaking still made her palms sweat, but she did it. Because it mattered. Because someone had to speak for the families who couldn't. Because there was power in telling the truth out loud. As the families settled in, a quiet hush came over the room. The lights dimmed just a little, and a video screen rolled down. It was the start of a short tribute video, something the team put together for the foundation's latest funding drive. Soft piano music played over the first image. Miles, in his hospital bed a year ago, giving a thumbs up despite the tubes, the bruises, the weight of what his body carried. Then came more faces, more children, more parents, laughter and tears and breakthroughs, and then Keanu's voice, measured, gentle, like he was speaking from the edge of a memory he never wanted to forget. The people who never ask for help, he began, are often the ones who need it most. The screen showed Danielle from months earlier, asleep in a chair beside Miles's hospital bed, a blanket falling off one shoulder. When you see someone falling behind, he continued, don't assume they're fine. A father appeared on screen now, lifting his daughter into his arms after a tough treatment. He looked tired, but there was joy in his eyes, the kind that comes from one more day together. Reach out, Keanu said. You could be the hand they're too tired to ask for. The video faded to black, and the words filled the screen. The Quiet Light Foundation. Hope isn't loud, but it shines. No one clapped when the screen rolled back up. They didn't have to. The silence afterward said everything. A moment of stillness, not from apathy, but from reverence, from understanding. Danielle sat with her hands folded in her lap, heart pounding in the quiet. She looked to her left, where Nina had taken a seat beside her. Her daughter had grown more than just a few inches in the past year. She'd grown into someone deeply compassionate, deeply steady. Nina reached over and took Danielle's hand. Outside, Miles pressed his face against the glass of the meeting room, making a silly face. Danielle laughed and waved him in. The door opened. He ran over and threw himself onto her lap. "Did I miss the video?" he asked, slightly out of breath. Danielle kissed the top of his head. Just in time for the most important part. Later that afternoon, when the gathering had dispersed and the sun began to dip low in the sky, Danielle stepped outside again. This time, she stood alone. The garden had grown in the past year. Taller hedges, new blooms, butterflies drifting lazily from petal to petal. The plaque beside the front walkway read, "In honor of the quiet strength it takes to carry hope in silence." She stood beside it, eyes scanning the sidewalk ahead. Not long after, a familiar car pulled up. Keanu stepped out quietly, in jeans and a dark jacket, sunglasses in one hand. No press, no entourage, just him. He walked over and smiled, nodding toward the building. "It's beautiful." Danielle smiled. "You made it possible." He shook his head. "No, I just helped light the match. You carried the fire." They stood in silence for a long moment, both watching Miles inside, running back and forth with another little boy in the lobby. "I never really believed people would care," Danielle admitted softly. "I thought we'd always be invisible." Keanu nodded slowly. "Most of the world doesn't see what's quiet." "But you do," she said, her voice catching slightly. He looked down, then back up, his eyes kind. "Only because I've been the one trying not to fall apart before. I know what it's like to wear the strong face, to hide the cracks." Danielle smiled. "Then maybe we're all a little cracked." He chuckled. "That's how the light gets in." Behind them, the foundation doors opened. Nina called out, "Dinner's ready. You're staying, right?" Keanu gave Danielle a questioning look. She laughed. "That's not a question. That's a Brooks family invitation." He grinned. "Then I wouldn't dare say no." As they turned toward the doors, Danielle paused and looked back one last time. The plaque gleamed softly. The garden swayed gently in the wind. Her voice was quiet, almost to herself. "I hope people remember this isn't just a story." Keanu stopped beside her. "They will. You're making sure of it. If this incredible story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments who in your life is quietly holding everything together. Because the world is full of quiet heroes. And sometimes, all it takes is a message, a moment, and the courage to answer.